when I was hired as head of enterprise architecture, my first job was actually to standardize things. And what I also didn't know was that that is the most hated person in the whole organization, because the person who's trying to make all the standards is the one telling people what they cannot do. That doesn't enable anybody or speed anybody up. That just makes people's lives more difficult. So the really important question is, where's the difference? And the difference is in the fact that platforms also harmonize and standardize, but without restricting. By standardizing, they actually enable, they allow people to do more things. So they achieve the opposite of what we traditionally think of as standardization.
Hey everyone, my name is Henry Suryawirawan, and you're listening to the Tech Lead Journal podcast, the show where I'll be bringing you the greatest technical leaders, practitioners, and thought leaders in the industry to discuss about their journey, ideas, and practices that we all can learn and apply to build a highly performing technical team and to make an impact in your personal work. So let's dive into our journal. Hello to all of you, my friends and my listeners. You're listening to the Tech Lead Journal podcast, the podcast where you can learn about technical leadership and excellence from my conversations with great thought leaders in the tech industry. If you haven't, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app to get notified for new episodes. Also subscribe to Tech Lead Journal's various other contents on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And consider supporting this podcast by either buying me a coffee at techleadjournal.dev/tip or becoming a patron at techleadjournal.dev/patron. My guest for today's episode is Gregor Hohpe. Gregor is back again for a second episode with his latest book, Platform Strategy. In this episode, Gregor discussed in depth about building platforms with a proper platform strategy. He began by describing what a platform is from a few different perspectives, the benefits it brings, and what strategy we should think about when building a platform. Gregor also emphasized the opposite difference between platforms and IT services, with the key difference of how a platform thrives with more scale. We then had a few fun discussions discussing building a platform on top of a cloud platform, the key skill set we need to build a good platform, and how we should build a proper platform abstraction. Towards the end, Gregor also covered the recent trend of building developer platforms and business capability platforms. You also do not want to miss Gregor's fun analogy of fruit basket versus fruit salad when explaining a good platform strategy. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode and getting to understand what we should do differently to build proper platforms with great strategy. And it's always fun when having a conversation with Gregor, especially with his smart humor and analogies. If you enjoy listening to this episode, please do share it with your colleagues, your friends, and communities, and leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Your small help will help me a lot in getting more people to discover and listen to this podcast, and I really appreciate it. So let's now go to my conversation with Gregor after quick words from our sponsor. Hey, a quick message for those of you who are listening to this episode on Spotify. I have a small favor to ask. Spotify now allows mobile users to rate podcasts. I would really appreciate it if you can take a quick pause to go to the Tech Lead Journal podcast page and leave your favorite show, your best rating on Spotify. It will help me a lot to get this podcast to reach more people on the platform. Thanks a lot. Hello guys, welcome back to another new episode of the Tech Lead Journal podcast. Today I'm very excited. I have a repeat guest. So he appeared in episode 50. That was like 100 over episodes, so probably like 2 years ago. His name is Gregor Hohpe, none other than Gregor Hohpe. I think some of you would have known Gregor, seeing his posts, seeing his talks, and reading his book. Today, we are going to cover his new book titled Platform Strategy. So Gregor, really happy to have you here again.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be back. I managed to be in the top 10 listing, I think, for a little while. So my ambition is to make a second step at getting back into the top 10. So let's see.
Right. Yeah, let's see. Okay, so Gregor, so we haven't been talking for like 2 years, right? So anything that you want to share, what have you been up lately and things like that?
Yeah, so my previous book and a previous chat was about cloud strategy. So that hasn't changed in a way. So I'm still very much associated with building cloud solutions. What has changed though is, so most of my work now is in serverless and in serverless automation, particularly. So I do a lot of work with Lambda and CDK and serverless integration. And that is a lot of fun because I can use some of the 20-year-old things from my enterprise integration patterns. And the reason I know it's 20 years old, because that book actually has its 20th anniversary, well, last month, like it had in October. So it's cool to be able to bring that stuff back into my daily work.
So it seems your books have some kind of a timeline, right? So you started with enterprise integration patterns long time ago, right? 20 years. So you also had software architect elevator, right?
Yeah.
Recently cloud strategy, and this time is platform strategy. The title also have strategy. Are you thinking of creating a series?
Yes, and the ambition was a little bit ahead of the reality for a while. So the idea was that the architect elevator, so that came out 3 years ago, like right at the beginning of the pandemic, right in 2020. And the idea there was to rethink a little bit what architects should be doing, right? There's many opinions about what architecture is and many opinions about what architects should be doing. I think last time we chatted a little bit about that. So the architect elevator was trying to take a look at, the architects aren't supposed to be the ones who are like the smartest people and tell everybody what to do and make all the decisions, but much rather they're supposed to fill in the gap between the grandiose visions and the reality, hence the elevator. So the strategy books are meant to be the application of that principle to different domains, like the domain of cloud computing, right? Where there's a lot of technical resources and a lot of high-level strategy stuff telling you all the things that you should be doing, but there's very little in between. Hey, like, how do I get from here to there? And platform strategy is, again, looking to do the same thing for platforms, which has become a very hot buzzword. But again, you ask 3 different people, you get 4 points of view. So I'm trying to get a better definition of what is a platform, what really makes a platform, how do you go about building one, and filling in that gap. And that's indeed intended to be a series. I had a hard time claiming it's a series because with one book, it's a little tough to say whether it's a one-off or a series. So I'm super excited that with 2 books now, it is actually a proper series.
Right. Thank you for sharing that plan, ambitious plan, right? I hope to see more strategy books from you because, to be honest, like when I read your book, I always have a good fun because you have a fun way and humor and metaphors that you introduce in your book, including in this platform strategy book as well. So let's start maybe in terms of platform, right? You mentioned just now it has become buzzwords. Maybe in the past, I don't know, 5 years, more and more people have been mentioning about platform as a word these days. So hence, there's a lot of confusion as well. Maybe from your definition, if you can help us define what is platform in your point of view.
Mm. It's probably good to state first that the whole idea isn't that new at all. Like, one sort of thing we suffer from collectively is we always believe that we invent everything. And we mean like the software people, right? The computer people, like how sometimes I'm called by my older relatives. We always feel like we invent everything. The platform idea isn't actually that new. And some of the popular examples are automotive platforms, right? The car manufacturers long time ago realized that making a new engine and brakes and transmission and everything for each car model is actually not a great idea. It's very expensive. And in the end, the people don't really just buy the car exactly because of the brakes that are in that car. So they started making platforms and putting different car models on top of a common platform. So the idea has been around for a long time. And if we look at the IT side, operating systems are also kind of platform, right? They're abstract away. In this case, it's not the engine and transmissions, but it's sort of the disk encoding and interfaces and all the hardware stuff, right? They abstract away. And then on top, you can build many, many different things on common hardware without having to deal with all the details. So that idea has been around for quite some time. Where I think it's gotten a huge boost recently, interestingly, comes from multiple angles. And that gets back to your question where the confusion originates. The one is the platform business models, like platform companies like the Airbnbs and the eBays of the world, where people say, hey, it's a multi-sided marketplace, right? You have sellers and buyers. And interestingly, that platform company itself often doesn't even hold inventory. Like Amazon does, for example. Now they ship physical products, but an Airbnb doesn't own any hotel room. And that has become known as a platform. So that gave a huge booster. And these are the Ubers, the Airbnbs of the world, the mega unicorns, and now some of the most valuable companies that we have. So that is the one worldview. The other worldview comes from a cloud platforms. It's actually kind of funny, like the GCP folks, the P obviously has the word platform in the name. The funny thing is on AWS, we don't like to use the word platform. So here, today I'm here as myself, so I can joke about it. So it's kind of funny, like where some people embrace the word and other people kind of shy away from it. But the reality is most clouds are platforms in a way, right? They give you a common layer that you can put many things on top of, and they abstract the things underneath. And then, so that also everybody is doing these days. And then if that wasn't enough, what everybody else also seems to be doing these days is making developer platforms, in-house platforms. They're called productivity platforms or IDPs, internal developer platforms. Again, we can't even agree on the acronym. And the idea is there to layer something on top of the base platform, like on top of the cloud, to make it easier to use for developers or to increase their productivity or to have some form of governance, right? It can also be to restrict. Now, with the three different use cases, and as I just hinted, people having different objectives, right? Some people want to make development faster, other people want to restrict what people can do. You can easily imagine that it's no longer that easy to look at something and say, oh, is this now a platform, or is this just like an IT service or framework or an abstraction layer or governance tool?
Right. So even after I heard you explaining it, right? So there are so many permutations and variables that could happen, right? To me, when I always heard about platform, it's about reusability, right? It's about unification or standardization of stuff. Maybe if you can elaborate, maybe you have mentioned just now a few other benefits, right? What are some of the benefits of a platform truly, right? Because for people to really understand that it is a platform, right, they need to understand, okay, there are benefits of using the platform.
Yes. And what I would say for the rest of our discussion, it will help if we leave the Ubers and Airbnbs, if we leave the multi-sided markets and all those aside, because they share some commonalities, but they are also very different from the platforms that we as engineers would normally build and use. So if you look inside organization, cloud platforms, engineering productivity platforms, your question is a very good one. And I think you hinted at the key words like sort of the standards, standardization, reuse, right? Those are the things that people want from these platforms. But this is not the first time we want reuse and standardization. I worked in large enterprises, and some people might know my joke when I was hired as head of enterprise architecture. I didn't really know what enterprise architecture was. It just sounded good. And my first job was actually to standardize things. And what I also didn't know was that that is the most hated person in the whole organization, because the person who's trying to make all the standards is the one telling people what they cannot do. They're like, oh, we want to build something on this database or use this programming language or this framework or this app server. And then the standards person comes with a enterprise architect title and says, no, 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 you cannot use that database. You can only use that database. So that is obviously not a platform. Right? That doesn't enable anybody or speed anybody up. That just makes people's lives more difficult. So the really important question is, where's the difference? And the difference is in the fact that platforms also harmonize and standardize, but without restricting. By standardizing, they actually enable, they allow people to do more things. So they achieve the opposite of what we traditionally think of as standardization. Now, the question is like, oh, that sounds a little magical, right? How can it restrict, like how can it standardize, but at the same time allow more innovation? And the key mechanism there is that not all standards are created equal. And a great example that we have that has the same property is HTTP. right? HTTP is a standard. I mean, it goes through the different incarnations and versions, but it's a very well spec'd out, very strict standard, and we all use it. So in a way, it constrains us. If you say, hey, I invented this other great protocol that I want to use, probably uphill battle. People will say, hold on, why are you not using HTTP? It's the standard. But we can see that HTTP has been a huge innovation booster, right? Without HTTP, we wouldn't have the cloud and all the other stuff. So that shows that you can sort of rewrite the laws of physics a little bit, where in the past it was always that, if I take choice away, then people can't be creative. But now we have ways where we also take some choice away in a way, but it actually allows people to do more things and more creative things. Cloud platforms, I'm using the P word here, the cloud platforms also have that property, right? I often remind people, I talk to a lot of customers in my day job, and if the meeting is a little bit boring or I want to sort of poke the box a little bit, I say, listen, people, we have a single product, basically, right? There's many, many services, but basically there's one AWS, right? There's no red, green, or blue AWS, right? And same with GCP Azure, right? It's basically one thing that these companies have. And I say, the AWS you're getting is the same AWS essentially that your competitor is getting. And people go like, oh, well, how can this be, right? It's like, yes, it's a standardized platform, but what people do on top, is nothing short of magical, right? I mean, people do all sorts of amazing things. So what I'm trying to get at with the book is like tease out a little bit, why is the one standard thing the most hated activity and constraining people? And why is with platforms that doing the opposite? And how can you recreate that? What are the essential properties that make that magical thing happen?
Yeah, when you explain about this, I think that's the insights for me, right? So people want to standardize, but they are more towards restricting, actually also restricting the kind of capability that people do with whatever they're building as a standard, right? So I think in your explanation just now, the platform, yes, will create some restriction, but the benefit is actually to enable people to do more stuffs, right? More creative stuffs, and even could be faster, it could be more creativity, more innovations and things like that. But it seems like a very, very tall order for many, many people, right? And that's why probably you have this thing called strategy, right? Platform strategy. So tell us,
Mhm.
why do people need to build some kind of a platform strategy before they embark on building platform or using platform?
Yeah, so the reason is that you need to be cautious is like as we already discussed, right? It's kind of a subtle but magical property which isn't easy to create. So it's very tempting to set out to make a platform, right? But if you don't really get the nuances of it, you just might be building another IT services layer. And I actually have a chapter in the book which is called Platform and IT Services Are Antonyms. They're like the opposite of each other. And what can easily happen in large organizations where I used to work and where many of my customers are, there's always the temptation to take what you have and sort of apply the new label to it, right? And it's understandable because you don't want to throw everything away, and you have shared services, or maybe even have a private cloud, some virtual machines, some ticketing system, maybe even some self-service portal, right? You have all these things, and then you're like, oh, that's actually most of what I need for a platform. Let me just make that into a platform. And unfortunately, most of the time that goes completely wrong because these things were built for control. They were not built for driving innovation and enable the diversity that you mentioned. And that's sort of the first important part of the strategy, is to tell you how different this actually is and make this very obvious. Like have these side-by-side comparisons. The stuff that you had before in a successful platform is almost the exact opposite. So I want people to not underestimate what they're signing up for. And I also want to give them some simple tests. Like you mentioned before, you like reading the books because they're sort of, not entertaining. I would say we're not in a movie business here, but I would say they're engaging in a way, right? They're accessible, but at the same time have serious content. So what I'm trying to do is capture this kind of advice in something that's memorable and easy to understand. So one of the tests I'm suggesting is, if you build a platform, people should do something on top that surprises you. Like if nobody does anything with your platform that generally surprises you, then you probably didn't make a platform, right? If you try to anticipate everything that people will do, it sounds very useful, because if you anticipate everything, you can make great reuse, right? You can provide exactly what everybody wanted, but you failed to make a platform because you didn't create this multiplier effect. You didn't make this innovation booster. So I'm trying to distill it down to these kind of tests that when people look at what they're proposing and saying, is this really allowing people to build something that we didn't even think of? And if the answer is, oh, not really, we just wanted to give them some common services, then probably that's an early indication that the platform strategy needs a little bit of revising.
Yeah, I think the metaphor that you use is like standing on top of the giant's shoulder, right? If you want to reach a higher height, you can, climb the ladder and things like that. But you can also stand on top of a platform, right? Or standing on the top of the giant's shoulder. And in this case here, right, your metaphor about a platform versus IT service, I think is very, very interesting for me, because some people, when I see real life example of people building platform, right? Most of them, I see it now becoming like an IT service instead of platform. Maybe if you can bring up some attributes that you see are the antonyms between platform and IT services, I think that will also be useful for people.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting that you also see that it's a super slippery slope. And we see a similar effect. Obviously, I work with a lot of customers migrating to the cloud, adopting cloud service. And the failure mode, unfortunately, is always relatively similar. Like people look at anything that's the bottom layer of a picture, right? We always have this mental picture of on the top is application development and there's other stuff underneath, right? And underneath can be IT services, it can be the cloud, or it can be a platform. So when we look at the organization, we like, there's the application teams there. And then this stuff is with the teams that do the bottom half, right? Now, that makes some sense because the folks who do the bottom half, they're used to provisioning services, doing operations, right? They have some really valuable skills in this area, but they work in a very, very different model. Like in a way, they're the best guys for this, but they're also the worst people for this because they have the technical skill in many cases, but they absolutely don't have the mindset or the way of working. And that's where this comes from, where both cloud initiatives or cloud transformations, like we like to call it, and platform initiatives, they struggle or completely fizzle out because basically the teams who are running them are not used to this way of working at all. So the way this shows up in many cases, and this is where I made this comparison table, is that IT services are often not full self-service, right? So you fill out some ticket or I used to fill out Excel spreadsheets to get a server, right? That's not how platforms work. Platforms are easy to get onto. Platforms live from scale. You want many people to use the platform. In a classic IT services, is everybody comes and wants something, you're probably overloaded and you become the bottleneck. So you can see from these examples, it's exactly the opposite. One is built for control. The other one is built for ease of onboarding. One is for ticketing semi-manual. The other one is complete self-service. The old model is based on the idea that the IT service is responsible for all the non-functional aspects, like all the scalability and security that's supposed to be done all in a bottom layer. The new model, the platform model, is a shared responsibility model. If your application is super brittle and leaky and full of vulnerabilities, no platform is going to tell you that it's magically going to fix that. So the division between the two teams is very different. Also, maybe last example, and the list goes on, right? But last example is that traditional IT services like stability, because they have learned that through stability, they get uptime and those known functional requirements that they're responsible for. So they don't like to change. Well, successful platforms change all the time. I mean, look at the cloud platforms, right? AWS used to have like 2 or 3 services, right? It was like EC2, S3, SQS, right? And then it's like a couple of hundred now, right? And the other one's no different, right? So every year there's a lot of new features, new things. Open source projects for platforms add features all the time. So platforms are based on evolution. And that's good because as the platform grows, it lifts up everything else with it. So you get new capabilities basically without doing much. And again, that's the exact opposite of the IT services because they always favor stability. So it's almost every way you look at it, it's the opposite. Or IT services are generally mandated, right? There's a mandate, oh, you cannot do anything if you don't use our service. Most successful platforms are not mandated. It's not 100%, but in most cases, it's voluntary. So again, it's the opposite. So what I wanted to do in the book is really, I don't like black and white painting because I always say for architects, everything is a trade-off. But in this case, I think a little bit black and white is helpful to really show you that it is totally the opposite of one another.
Yeah. And I think you sum it up also in one statement, right? Platform thrives with scale, right? So if you don't see some kind of a scale where people build more solutions, more adoptions, more usage, and even they recommend it to other people, right? I think that's not like a true platform, right? Because that could be just some IT services that you mandate people to use for control, for standardization, or for whatever that is.
Correct. And in some sense, that already presents a little bit of a challenge for in-house platforms, right? If platforms thrive on scale, if you build something custom in-house, you will never have the scale that, let's say, a cloud provider will have, right? So you need to be cautious. Now, the good news is that you can build on top of a platform, so your platform doesn't have to start from scratch. So that helps a little bit. But you're absolutely right. There's a couple of important mechanisms at work here. The one thing is platforms are indirect value creators. If you build world's most beautiful platform and nobody is on that platform, the value creation is absolutely zero, right? Like the thing doesn't do anything on its own. It enables developers, it speeds them up, it helps them make fewer mistakes, build better application. Like there's a million ways to sort of position it, but the value only comes with the usage. And that means, right, the scale is where the value is versus traditional IT. They often suffer from their own success. I see this with cloud centers of excellence. So as a quick side note, they're also candidates to be relabeled as platform teams, right? As we look around, it's either the IT service teams or in a slightly more modern organization, the CCOE, the Cloud Center of Excellence, that gets relabeled as platform team. And if that is super popular and it scales, they usually become a bottleneck, right? So it thrives on scale because that's the only way it can generate value. And the other magical maneuver that platforms do, and this is visible with cloud platforms. Cloud platforms are a scale business, right? Building these data centers, these like billions and billions of dollar data center, undersea cables, like this infrastructure, that is clearly an economies of scale model, right? The bigger you are, right, like you can make those kind of investments. Custom CPUs, right? Like almost every cloud provider, whether it's Graviton or Titan chips or whatever you have, right? Almost everybody has custom hardware these days. Those are not things you can do as an average enterprise. So there's a clear scale effect. But the magic of those platforms is that the usage of these platforms is not a scale effect. Like I can run one lambda function for like 1 second, right? And pay, I could do the math, but pay some ridiculously small amount, like a fraction of a penny on it, right? Or I can get an EC2 instance for 1 hour, right? And pay like 50 cents for it. So the magic of the cloud platforms has been that they use economies of scale underneath because that's the only way to make these things. But they offer it as what I call economies of speed. You can have it instantly. You can get as little or as much as you want. You can shut it off. So they changed the rules of engagement between the usage of the platform and the implementation. Now, for cloud platforms, we kind of knew that. And probably if my memory was better in Cloud Strategy book, probably it says something like this about cloud platforms. What I'm trying to do with platform strategy is to take a step back and say, now, is that just for clouds or is this for all platforms? And how can you as a platform team make that work for you? So in a way, the platform book is sort of one more level of abstraction over the cloud book in some sense.
Right. You bring a topic, cloud center of excellence. So in my experience, I've seen people building platforms on top of cloud platforms. Like you mentioned, we can build platform on top of the base platform, right? In this case, it's cloud platform, especially if you want to go hybrid, multi-cloud, or especially if you don't want to expose people to the real cloud console, for example. So tell us a little bit more about this strategy. How do you think people should do it? Because so many people are doing it. How should they do it so that it becomes more successful for the organization rather than limiting people with options?
Yeah, and I would say the sad reality, they are maybe more poor examples than good examples. I think we're slowly learning, and there's few companies now that basically platform builder toolkits to make it easier to build platforms. But the harsh reality is that making such a platform that you layer on top of the cloud is extremely difficult for a number of different reasons. Well, the one reason I already mentioned, right? The platform that you're building on evolves. So you might be building something that in a year or so, the base platform does. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And actually, this happened to me when I was in financial services. I built an in-house platform, and then quite a few years later, somebody came like, hey, all this stuff you built, they replaced it all with like AWS or something. And they thought I would be very sad about it. It's like, oh, that's great, because that means we were exactly on the right trajectory, right? We were a few years ahead with our specific needs, and now the base platform does it. So I should throw away what I built and just use the base platform, because you will always have better economics. But that takes a very different mindset, right? You must be happy when your things become obsolete, which is not the way normal IT works. They would always think about cost recovery. They're like, oh, no, this thing needs to live as long as possible because we need to get our money back. So this is one way in which these platforms struggle. The other one, and there's a magical word here, which is, I think, very useful, but also very difficult, and that's the cognitive load. So almost all of this, from the team topologies, right? Matt and Manuel, written a book, super popular, very helpful models. I'm pretty sure they were on Tech Lead podcast at some point. So they introduced the notion of a platform team. Now, careful, platform team and platform still two different things. And there's one unfinished chapter in the book, which is actually called Platform Team Without Platform. But basically, the team topologies really focus on the concept of cognitive load. And that's important, because if you look at today's development teams, right, there's one maneuver that we've executed over the last couple of years, and that's called shift left. Basically, security should be shifted left, operations should be shifted left, policy and compliance should be shifted left, right? Policy as code, right? Now we have DevSecOps, DevArcSecOps. Basically, you build it, you run it. So basically, everything is piled into the development team. So I no longer call it shift left, I call it pile left, because everything gets piled over and people basically going bananas, right? So if we don't manage to reduce their cognitive load, there's like no way you can have such a team that can do all these kind of things. So the idea is extremely valuable. Now, the reason I mention it's also a bit of a dangerous word is that it's used to justify everything. So people say like, oh, we don't want you to use the native cloud services because we want to be portable, or we don't want you to use this region and we want to fix this parameter. And they say, look, it's good for you because it reduces your cognitive load. And that is not true. So let's take a very simple example. Let's say you have a cloud service and it has 20 different parameters. And you as a platform team with good intentions, you say, I default 10 of those 20 parameters. So the developer only has to now worry about 10 parameters. That on the surface would seem, hey, setting 10 parameters is easier than 20. Didn't the cognitive load go down by 50%? The reality is no, because behind these parameters sit concepts. So if you fix the availability zone, that's probably fine, right? People don't need to worry about it unless they need to do something cross availability zones, right? Even then you struggle because like, oh, I never actually knew what an availability zone is because they were set for me. Now somebody says I need 4 nines or 5 nines, so I need to run across multiple ability. What is that? So it's not that easy. Also, depending which parameters you fix, not all parameters are independent. You might create some sort of intellectual minefield where you sort of take some concepts out of the overall construct, and sometimes needing to understand a half a thing is harder than understanding the whole thing, because if you see the whole thing, you can understand what relates to what and what combinations are useful, versus if I sort of randomly take some pieces out of the puzzle, it's actually harder. I mean, maybe a metaphor is, and it reminds me of the funny movie The Accountant. I blogged before about transformations and not hiring a hitman to fix your stuff, which the movie is partly about, but it has an example where somebody tries to put together a puzzle, and the kid is autistic, so one piece is missing. So he is very unhappy and very agitated. But that metaphor just came to my head, right? Let's say you give somebody a puzzle of 1,000 pieces, and you say, hey, I want to make this easier for you, so I took away half the pieces. It's worse, right? Because you don't know if the piece is there. If it isn't, like in the end, you don't know which ones are missing. You would need to give people a different puzzle with 500 pieces that fit together. You can't just take out half the pieces from the puzzle, because you just make it harder for people. So that's where the book is trying to go. And it's a little bit, it sounds kind of maybe abstract, but that's where I see a lot of these initiatives derail. They say, hey, I take some things away from you. Doesn't that make your life easier? And the short answer is no, not necessarily.
Yeah, in your book, you also bring up an example where, for example, some of these parameters are hidden and they are applied in the actual instance, for example. And then there is an issue, like when you troubleshoot, you see an error message, but the root cause is mentioning something that you didn't even know that you tweaked before, right? So you kind of like limit people to understand what is going on and even troubleshoot. And you need to file ticket support and things like that, and things become slower. So I think this is also another danger zone that I read from reading your book, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's really, really good advice for people who are building platforms. And another thing, I think when you build this in-house platform, you need to have skill set, right? So any tips here for people, how they should find skill set and how they should think about finding people who can build a truly developer-friendly platform?
Yeah, and perfect question. Ironically, this is another common failure mode. So I'm a little bit worried that we may be painting the picture too darkly here about all the things that can go wrong. But in the end, a good strategy is intended to keep you on the good path and keep you out of trouble. So I think mentioning and talking about failure scenarios is actually very common. So here's a failure scenario I've seen. Almost every large organization doesn't have enough fully skilled developers as they would like, right? And that's always going to be the case, right? Because there's a lot of stuff to do. Modern applications are demanding, right? They're distributed. We have fine-grained deployment models, automation, right? We release often, like we can do amazingly cool stuff, but it's not exactly trivial, right? So there will always be a shortage of skill set. So what these companies they do is like, okay, if I have a lot of developers which are so, can I pick good developers and make a platform so that the so developers become good developers? And funnily, Martin Fowler, I think, commented on this, wow, it must have been a decade or two ago, because that same mistake was made with frameworks. It's like, oh, instead of a platform, I built a framework, right? Where all the good developers build the framework, and then the not so good developers become now good developers thanks to the framework. And that basically has never worked. So the failure scenario is that you also don't have the skills to build a platform, because the bar for that skill is much, much higher. And I'll give some example in different ways in which the bar is much, much higher. The one thing is, so let's start with what's perceived as the easier one, but usually the harder one, and that is, how does a platform team function? Like, how does it engage with customers, right? How does it take feedback? What is the rate of change? We said platforms must evolve, but if they change every day, nobody will be happy. You can go and ask your customers what they want, but building what your customers say they want is also not a great way to build a platform. So there's a lot of skills there in terms of, it's like running a successful product company, a lot of trade-offs, prioritization, right? And that is something very different, especially in IT operations, right? Where basically, here's the 3 servers you can have, please be happy, right? This is, again, the exact opposite, where you need to be customer-centric, do a lot of product management, do a lot of marketing, a lot of consulting. So that skill you need to have. And the technical skill you need to really have is to really understand cognitive load and abstraction. So if defaulting half the parameters doesn't reduce the cognitive load, what actually does? And I see people struggle with this a lot. So my favorite example is, so people look at the different cloud providers and say, oh, there's SQS, I'm a queuing messaging guy, so I must make an example from message queues. So you have like SQS, right? You have the Azure Event Bus, and you have Google Pops Up, right? So when they say, aha, I make an abstraction and I call that abstraction message queue. But in the end, you didn't really abstract much. It was already a message queue before you abstracted it. Maybe it had some specific runtime settings, but two things come into play. You didn't really simplify things that much because it's still a queue. It's asynchronous. You need to deal with things like back pressure and time to live, right? Like all that stuff doesn't go away. And to be honest, the original queues probably have some really important settings underneath, like FIFO or not FIFO, on scale out and many other things that if you take those away, again, you have the puzzle where half the pieces are missing. So I see even talented teams struggle with this. They say, oh, but I made this abstraction layer, but you didn't actually abstract something. So what I've seen from some customers where they are really successful at this and have a much better approach is they start taking concepts from their business domain. It was really interesting. I talked to a customer like about a month ago, and they described what they were doing. And then I was really excited because I liked it so much. And their comment was, oh, finally somebody who understands what we're doing, because they couldn't find anybody to appreciate what they had done because it was very subtle. But for me, it was absolutely obvious and ingenious. So rather than trying to abstract SQS into a queue, they have concepts that are important in their, what I would call, business technical domain. So they are financial services companies. So they have a lot of compliance requirements. So they need to have ledgers. So when you have a database, you can make updates in the database, but every change must be tracked in a log or a ledger, they call, right? That's the way the industry functions. You can't just like go and change the number in the bank account. You add and subtract money, and that gets all logged. So that is something that's very inherent to their business and their business technical domain. So their platform now has constructs like this. They have ledgered database, and underneath is DynamoDB and EventBridge pipes and another DynamoDB, the way they do that. But they didn't call this like two DynamoDBs and EventBridge pipes or a queue, whatever, right? They call this a ledgered database. And the difference is very subtle. You could even make an abstraction that's called database with customer data and database without customer data, or database with PII, like personally identifiable information, or without. And to most people, that would seem very subtle. It's still a database. And again, you're probably just defaulting a few fields, right? Because maybe the PII database needs to be encrypted or in a special availability zone, in a special region. You're like, oh, you're just defaulting fields. No, in this case, you're not just defaulting fields, you're building a new domain language on top of it. So the second skill that you really need to have is you need to be able to do domain modeling, DDD, really domain-driven design, but for this business technical layer, right? It's half cloud and technical stuff. You talk about databases, right? That's obviously technical stuff, but with a strong business flavor. Does it have PII? Does it need to be ledgered? And I think that is a skill we still struggle with, and the techies will dismiss it as too fluffy stuff. They're like, oh, it's still a database, like whatever, what are you talking about? And the business people don't necessarily have the skill to really understand like DynamoDB and EventBridge and pipes and all the other thing. So you're living right in that area, which I find super fascinating, but I've seen it very rarely that that is done well. And that touches on sort of how it can be done well, but it also touches on why so many things fail by just saying, hey, I abstract SQS into a queue, or I default some fields, and all that sounds nice, but it's not reducing cognitive load, and it's not giving you the abstractions that you need.
Wow, I think that's a pretty good insights, right? The example when you mentioned they created their own concept, like a business technical domain concept, right?
Yes.
But I think that is really insightful for me. And when you mentioned about creating abstraction, right? I also love the metaphor you introduced in the book, right? Abstraction, not in illusion, right? So sometimes we create abstraction, but actually it's an illusion, right? It doesn't actually abstract away things. We create such that it becomes like a unified interface, but the implementation details can be so different, right? Between, for example, different queue mechanism from different clouds, right? And people will be stuck, like, because yeah, because they think it's an abstraction, but the behavior is different. So I think this is also another
Yeah.
danger zone.
Just picking on that really quickly. So yeah, that happens if people want to abstract too much. They say, oh, I make this beautiful logical abstraction. Now I have this queue, this generic queue, but it turns out any distributed system has a lot of physical properties, right? And no logical layer can abstract away physical properties, right? And Joel Spotsky, right, always, never short of an opinion, right? He said all abstractions are leaky. And that's probably true. I would say the leakiness isn't that horrible, right? So for example, I don't mind if my queue thing has an SQS setting on it. That's not what's making my day good or a bad day. But what leaks through is the physical aspect: latency, failures, retries, queues filling up, all those kind of things. And an abstraction layer cannot make that go away. And that's where I work in serverless, as I said in the beginning. That is full of that stuff, right? Because serverless solutions, they're fine-grained, asynchronous, event-driven. So the physical properties are extremely important. And then people try to make it look very simple. And simple doesn't always mean better abstraction. So the classic example is RPC. RPC is also a beautiful abstraction, except it doesn't work. It pretends to be something that it isn't, because it pretends that there's no latency, there's no partial failure, it pretends you have a call stack, right? It pretends it's always consistent. It pretends the 8 fallacies of networks don't exist, right? Or distributed computing. Like, basically it pretends all these things that are not true. And that is the classic example of you build an illusion. So what we learn is it's not about taking as many things away as possible. It's about finding sort of the right level where you can create a new mental model or a new domain, like a new vocabulary for people that's cohesive in itself, right? And that is, in the end, it is domain-driven design, and that in the end is quite challenging. So when people say, oh, we're going to build some platform, we have some servers and some cloud stuff, we're going to go build a platform, I kind of want them to read, maybe, well, ideally read the book first, but whichever way you do, think a little bit more first about what are you really achieving, and are those really abstractions? Are you really reducing cognitive load? We use all these words way too loosely, right? Like, everybody talks about this stuff, but then really making it work is a whole different story. So yeah, hence the illusions.
Right. I'd like to bring another metaphor that you bring in the book, right? Because we have been talking about, building a lot of components, a lot of cohesion and things like that. You have this analogy, fruit salad versus fruit basket. So I think this is a fun one. So if you can elaborate a little bit more for us to learn from.
Yes, and this fits exactly what I was trying to say earlier, right? I like to take metaphors from real life, right? One of my most popular article is still the Starbucks does not use two-phase commit, right? It's like, it's very memorable, but it has a serious meaning. And this one has also meaning. And interestingly, this was the very first chapter. This came out of my work at the government of Singapore when I worked for GovTech, where we were actually building an engineering productivity platform, and we had to make design decisions. So one question was Confluence and Jira and a few other tools, is that a developer platform? Right? Because, okay, whichever flavor you prefer, but let's say you have a ticketing system, a source code repository, a build pipeline, right? Isn't that making a great developer platform? Because it gives the developers all the things to be productive. And then I was saying, yes, that's useful, but I coined that the fruit basket. Basically, assuming the different systems, like basically the wiki and the backlog management systems, right? And your code repository, your build pipeline, they're like the fruit. And now you put this fruit into a basket, and that's bundled together. It's convenient, but it doesn't have, the sum of the fruit is not bigger than the individual fruit, right? You put 4 fruit in a basket, that thing is a basket with 4 fruit. So the whole isn't greater than the sum of the parts, right? The whole is equal to the sum of the parts. It's a basket with 4 fruit. And in real life, we know the counterexample. We know the counterexample of fruit salad. Now, again, it seems trivial because it's also like fruit in it, but it opens up entirely new use cases. You don't need tools. You don't need to peel anything. You don't need a knife. It's easy to take to a picnic. It's easy to make a mixture that otherwise you cannot do. If you want to make a fruit basket and one of your fruit is a watermelon or a jackfruit, to make it worse, right, you're going to struggle to balance that out. Well, in a fruit salad, that is no problem because you control the mixture. And what I remind people is the per kilo price of fruit salad is routinely 2 to 3 times higher than the fruit because it has a higher value proposition. So what we learn is like, yes, fruit basket is an okay way to start. You bundle some things together, but don't believe everybody will be jumping up and down at your fantastic platform because you didn't really create a whole. You didn't create anything cohesive. You just bundled a few things. Maybe you share some accounts or something, but really you didn't put anything much on top. You just bundled. So you composed some things, but you didn't abstract anything. So I always nudge people, think about, can you make a fruit salad? And I talked to one customer where folks told me after our meeting, they changed their title to fruit salad maker because they're building an in-house platform. And they kept trying to explain to people that sort of, just like Jira and Confluence and a few other things don't make a really good platform, but he had a hard time articulating that. So he was so happy, he said fruit salad. So wherever he goes is, we need fruit salad, not fruit basket. And that obviously makes me happy because it means these lighthearted metaphors speak really to challenges that people have and help them communicate even to upper management or the famous non-technical people who in many cases are more technical than some of the developers, but it makes it easy to communicate the differences and the nuances. And that's what I'm always aiming for.
Right. So I think it's always a fun metaphor coming from you, right? Fruit salad versus fruit basket. I hope people use this whenever they explain about building platform. Another thing, I think when we talk about platform, right, there's so many probably resources, posts, and things like that related to developer productivity, developer platform. So in your point of view, in your experience, what is a good developer platform? What kind of problem it should solve? And what kind of strategy we should build for developer platform in an organization?
So yeah, that as I mentioned, this is one of the popular use cases and one that I was personally involved in. I think there's a couple of different angles you can take. And we first need to understand that this is actually out of cloud strategy and also from work at GovTech. We called it the four-leaf clover of application-oriented cloud. So first you need to understand, what are all the things an application needs in its ecosystem? Because that's my candidates for the platform, right? And the answer is not that difficult to get to. The problem is people often latch onto one thing and forget the other. So you need a CI/CD pipeline. You need a build system because that's how your software comes to life. You need a runtime underneath. You need monitoring and observability. And you probably also need some service integration for things to talk to each other. All those are good starting points for platforms, right? If I make it very easy. So basically, if I have complete development environments out of the box, like I don't need to do anything and just say, what kind of application do I want to build? And it builds that now. That is useful. Now, interestingly, that is so useful that many base platforms do this now. Like I know our thing's best, but Code Catalyst is basically doing exactly these things. Is like a sort of template to give you a full development environment, right? But I think what really helps is to have clarity on the different parts. So I think observability and monitoring is often overlooked in these kind of platforms. And those are areas where having some commonality is extremely helpful, because if something goes wrong, I don't want to look like 12 different places to find out what's actually happening. So I would say for teams to build these internal developer platforms, so there are two parts of advice. A, look at the whole picture. Too many folks like, oh, platform equals Kubernetes, right? And they always talk about the runtime. Well, that's nice, it's all great, but you're forgetting all the other pieces. Or people think only CI/CD pipeline and forget the other. So see the whole picture. And second, think carefully about how you're going to build this over time. Are you going to make a sort of minimal viable platform, and another kind of buzzword, but are you making something minimally viable for all pieces and then you enhance? Or do you make a really, really good CI/CD part, which is like totally awesome, but you're lacking all the other pieces, right? And both have ups and downs, right? Like if you have 4 half-finished pieces, maybe it's very cohesive, but it's maybe not that feature-rich, versus the opposite, it's very feature-rich, but is incomplete. So there is no easy answer. And the forward of my book has a warning label, like literally, like it's sort of like when you buy an appliance and it says, don't touch the wire. So it has like a warning safety label. And my safety label is the book doesn't give you answers, right? There's no easy answer. One way or the other way is better. The book is trying to help you ask better questions and come to better answers yourself. And that's the same true here. Both of those are viable routes. And I want to help you be aware of that decision and make that decision consciously and give you some guidance. But in the end, I cannot tell you which one is better for your situation. So there isn't a magic score chart or recipe for these developer platform teams to be successful, but it's more, it would sound a little bit funny, but it's more around seeing the whole picture, decision discipline. It sounds like very fluffy in a way, but that is by far the hardest part and by far the most important part.
Right. Apart from developer platform, actually, some companies also think about business capability platform, right? Things like, for example, if you want to reuse some parts of the solution in the company, right, they want to create a platform so that other departments or other teams can also reuse that. Do you also have some advice for people who are building this kind of a business capability platform so that they avoid that kind of a loophole or pitfall that people normally go into?
Yeah, and this is actually one of the frameworks early in the book for delineating in a more fine-grained way the different kind of platforms. Is like in-house people often have technical platforms like the stuff we just talked about, which is for running applications and building applications. And then they often have business platforms, and often they have ecosystem like platforms that connect with other things. So this is very real and it's useful. Absolutely. Again, there is more failure modes than one might think about. And here's the catch that I see. The business platforms, they're stuck in the model of I can anticipate what everybody needs. And we said right in the beginning that is dangerous and not exactly what platforms are about. The picture they tend to use, and the Architect Elevator actually already makes fun of that picture, is the picture of a pyramid, right? They say like, oh, I have all this common business functionality like accounting, HR systems, right? Whatever I might need, that is for all my lines of business and all my countries. Then I have some other things that might be country specific. And then I have something like the little cherry on the cake, maybe a few configuration settings that just make the specific market or product, right? It's always that vision. And on PowerPoint, that vision looks amazingly good because it's massive amount of reuse, and then each solution just has to like put the little tiny token on top, and then everything is perfect. In reality, this never works. And it's not a platform. It's again the antithesis of a platform, because the platform is not trying to anticipate everything, and it's trying to enable people to build better solutions. These business efforts, they do the exact opposite. They try to figure out what could everybody possibly need. I build this in, and then people just need to sort of fill in the little blank. If they were right, this wouldn't be so bad. But in reality, it's impossible to be right on all these things because needs are changing. You just cannot possibly be so smart. So my worry there again would be is that the teams who now go on the platform bandwagon are the same teams who did that before, who built the pyramids. And my joke is always we stopped building pyramids 4,000 years ago for good reasons, right? So let's not do this again. But it's the same story as with the developer platforms. If you have the same teams with the same mindset trying the new approach, the odds that they fall back into the old pattern is extremely high. And that will void the whole platform model. And then things get worse. That management will see, oh, this platform stuff actually doesn't work, right? We failed at it. Oh, who told me all these platform thingies, right? And then they hire the consultants for a lot of money to go fix it, right? And the whole thing goes into some sort of tailspin. So yes, business platforms very useful, but really you need to rethink the way you go about making those. Same as with the developer platforms.
Right. I think there are lots of learnings in this conversation about platforms, right? So I hope the listeners here, after you heard about this from Gregor, right, you rethink again like the strategy for your platform. Or if you are actually building the platform, right? Maybe you should label it something else. So it's been a pleasure, Gregor. Unfortunately, due to time, we need to wrap up pretty soon. But I have the same question that I asked you in the first episode, which is I call the 3 technical leadership wisdom. You can think of it just like an advice that you want to give to the listeners here. It could be related to the platform strategy, or it could be something else as well.
Mm. Yeah, and one would hope that over the years I get wiser, so there should be more wisdoms. At the same time, I think my own bar also goes up. So let me see what is high on my mind after working on this book. I think one wisdom I've definitely run into a lot is that bad architects talk in extremes and good architects talk in trade offs. It's rarely ever the case that one thing is the right solution for everything, and especially not a technology or architecture. So, my wisdom is don't get latched on to everything must be event driven or loosely coupled or Kubernetes or this cloud vendor or that cloud vendor, right? That is rarely the right answer. The other wisdom that I might give is that organizations tend to reward specialists, right? Like if you're really good at something, it's very easy to put you in a certain box and you will do very well. I have friends who do database tuning and they charge crazy amounts of money because they are really good at this. Somebody's database doesn't work, the customer's not happy. They go in for like a day and charge some crazy amount of money, but the customer is happy because now everything is working. So it's very tempting to go this route. But what I find is that the kind of solutions that we build also consider being a dot connector, right? We just talked earlier about, building this platform is highly technical. It's cloud stuff, it's queues and time to live and distributed system, but it's also domain-driven design, very much so. So my second advice would be look over the horizon and see whether you can piece different things together, because I think in today's world, that might be as important as being a specialist in some area. And my last advice that I often give is thinking is the highest ROI activity you can possibly do. I see too many people who say, we need to make a decision. Let's ask the expert. Let's get an answer. Let's move forward. And when you say, let's think about this, like we did earlier, like, the queue versus SQS versus the ledger database, right? Like we're sort of musing and reflecting and it's a little bit abstract. It's too easy for people to put that away as like, no, we're not in school here. We don't need to philosophize. We need to go make a decision. And I think that's short-sighted. So my third advice would be take time to think, play around a little bit with metaphors and words and different things, because that time is extremely well spent and will pay off many, many times over.
Wow, really beautiful. I think these are all different from the first episodes you gave. So I think that's really, really cool advice. So Gregor, for people who love to read the book, is there a place where they can find online, how they can reach out to you and things like that?
Yeah, so I'm fairly active on social media. So LinkedIn is always good. And sort of my home base for all these things, as I mentioned at the very beginning, all these books are essentially applications of the architect elevator concept. So architectelevator.com is still the best starting point for the different books and my blog and everything else. So I'm always happy for folks to start from there.
Thank you again for your time for this second episode. So I look forward for more strategy books from you. And thanks again for explaining about platform today.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Yeah, I look ahead for the next episode when the next book is done. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode and for staying right until the end. If you highly enjoyed it, I would appreciate if you share it with your friends and colleagues who you think would also benefit from listening to this episode. And if you're new to the podcast, make sure to subscribe and leave me your valuable review and feedback. It helps me a lot in order to grow this podcast better. You can also find the full show notes of this conversation on the episode page at techleadjournal.dev website, including the full transcript, interesting quotes and links to the resources mentioned from the conversation. And lastly, make sure to subscribe to the show's mailing list on techleadjournal.dev to get notified for any future episodes. Stay tuned for the next Tech Lead Journal episode, and until then, goodbye.